Vinaka. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our viewers from Fiji to Turkey in the Asian Pacific region and beyond. My name is Fulori, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today for this productivity talk organized by the Asian Productivity Organization. Today's P-Talk topic is right-sizing and restructuring. Do they improve productivity performance in the public sector? In an era marked by global crisis, rising inflation, and geopolitical shifts, amid other uncertainties, governments worldwide face mounting fiscal constraints and economic challenges. These pressures have prompted fundamental reforms aimed at disciplined financial management and improved public service delivery. A notable reform is right-sizing and restructuring government operations as part of key strategies for good governance to enhance bureaucratic effectiveness and efficiency. Right-sizing and restructuring approaches are strategic processes that focus on optimizing an organization's structure, workforce, and resource allocation to improve efficiency, reduce redundancy, and enhance overall performance. The APO has published a report this year on strategic approaches in right-sizing and restructuring initiatives in the public sector that examine various approaches of right-sizing and restructuring and assess their impact on public sector efficiency and effectiveness of 7 APO member economies in the region, including Fiji, Malaysia, Nepal, Mongolia, Pakistan, the Philippines, and Sri Lanka. For those of you who have not checked this report yet, please go to the APO website and download it for free. To explain the findings of the report, we are privileged to be joined today by the chief expert of this APO research project. Joining us in this P-Talk is Dr. Myung Jae Moon, Underwood Distinguished Professor from Yonsei University, the Republic of Korea. A warm welcome to you, Professor Moon. Would you like to say hello to our viewers?
Hi, everybody. Hi, Flory. This is great to be part of the P-Talk. I'm very excited about to deal with this compelling topic. My presentation will be based on the report we put together with the 7 different excellent experts. And I really look forward to the presentation and Q&A sessions.
Thank you for your warm greetings, Professor Moon. Now, to share with us the highlights of the research report, we would like to invite Professor Moon for his presentation.
Hello. Today, my topic, again, right-sizing and restructuring. Do they improve productivity performance in the public sector? I think the topic is really relevant and compelling since we are dealing with a very turbulent and tough era we all have. Well, let me just first try to talk about historical context. Of course, public sector productivity performance initiative is not something new. There have been a lot of initiatives taken by different countries. Well, early 19th century reforms built particularly robust executive branches. They really tried to build government functions, and I'll talk about that later a little bit. And then late 20th century, there is a reaction to a big inefficient waste of government, and which is really NPM, New Public Management Initiative. And they really try to prioritize privatization, decentralization, deregulation, outsourcing, contracting out. Application of information technology is really big thing. Electronic government, digital government is really one of the big initiatives. The shift from government to governance and actually citizen engagement participation is also another initiative. Well, as I mentioned earlier, my presentation will be based on the report that I show you, strategic approaches in right-sizing and restructuring initiatives in the public sector, and challenges and lessons in enhancing the effectiveness and efficiency. Here, well, we want to both enhancing effectiveness as well as efficiency in the public sector. Well, take a look at this one. Let's take a look at the last 2 centuries. And this is the graph that I drew from the Google Ngram. This one shows you the big trend for last 2 centuries. Are several big picks in the government reforms, public sector innovations. The first pick is here, right after World War II. At the time, there's huge demand for expansion of government functions and initiative taken for building government capacity so that there's a big recruitment of government officials as well as the establishment of big government units. And then the second pick is late 1960s and 70s. And that's what we call new public administrations for equity and relevance. In fact, that's the time that people began to be more interested in human rights and social welfare. So the government was really asked for more service provisions for social welfare programs and then human rights and more practical and relevant policy initiative. And then later, late 1970s and 80s, and that's the time that we call new public management. And that's the time that there's a very widespread perception on government inefficiency. And many people think that governments were too wasteful, so that we should learn from market and private corporations. So the efficiency and then competition in the public sector was really asked. Well, since then, there was sort of a drop in public sector innovation government reforms. But I think this is a time that we might have more demand for government reforms and particularly right-sizing and restructuring initiatives are necessary. That's why there are 7 different country experts work together and try to find some of the past government initiative for restructuring and right-sizing initiative taken by different governments. We try to get some lessons and what should be taken in future. Well, new public management initiatives and basically emphasizing customer focus, competition, entrepreneurship, risk-taking, performance management, and measurement were emphasized. There are several tools adopted, of course: outsourcing, performance contract, deregulations, market-based approaches. We aim to cost control and more cost-efficient government and agile, flexible responses to the changing environment, so that we want to promote responsiveness to service demand. Of course, there were side effects, drawbacks. They are fragmentation, coordination issues, and then hollowing risks in the government because of the outsourcing, of course. Hollowing state problems actually we experienced during the pandemic. Many different countries really suffered from the lack of capacities in dealing with COVID-19. There are deep cutbacks, reduced surge capacity for complex crises. COVID-19, the pandemic, exposed the gaps in structure of government and staffing shortage and coordination issues. So that we need to think about how we rebuild our capacity through resilience and rebuilding core capacities of government. And that's something that we need to think about with the right sizing and restructuring. And some of the people argue that, well, we should work on neo-Weberian state so that more government capacity at the same time, of course, cost-efficient government. Particularly because, just like a pandemic, we will deal with more VUCA issues. VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. So that we will face with more VUCA issues in a society. So the government should be more agile, and then government should be more accountable without really just simply hollowing out. So that's why right sizing and restructuring reframes the target really effectiveness and sustainable cost. Well, how right sizing is different from downsizing. Of course, we talked a lot about downsizing during the NPM period. Downsizing is actually the focus is the size. So that how we reduce government size by reducing the number of government employees, reducing the share of the government budget in proportion to basically GDP. So that the goal is enhancement of cost efficiency, and then really dealing with potential wastefulness of the state. So that's the issues that we have. And then right sizing is a little bit different. It's not simply downsizing of this government. It's not simply reducing the number of government employees and budget. And actually, we want to upsize and strengthen the government capacity, maintaining core functions, so that when we have VUCA issues, the pandemic in the future, we hope that we really deal with those problems in an effective way with the functions we maintain, so that there are differences between what downsizing tried to accomplish and then what right sizing tried to accomplish. Of course, there are different tools. And tools for downsizing is basically you try to map the mandates, programs, and then what are the delivery models. And also you try to look at how many people you have and then how many people we need. Right sizing, actually there are more strategic initiative should be taken. Strategic workforce planning, development, and deployment. So that what are the people we need to maintain or strengthen the government functions, particularly core functions? What are the good way of delegation and decentralization, so that working with local and provincial governments, at the same time working with nonprofit sectors and private sectors, and how we really utilize digital technologies. And these days, many governments try to work on the potential utility of artificial intelligence. And then performance management. And then business process reengineering, so that we try to look at the work processes so that make a more efficient, at the same time, more effective government. Well, downsizing and then right sizing. And then here we have restructuring. Some of the people use right sizing and restructuring in an interchangeable way, but there are some specific differences. Restructuring is more about organizational design and functions and systems. So that restructuring, we often need functional reviews, business process reengineering, we call BPL, and then SOE, state-owned enterprise reforms, and corporation privatizations, decentralization, and right sizing, often in narrow sense, reallocation and risk and resizing the size of the government officials based on the functions that we need. So right sizing is more focused on size and capacity maintenance. And then restructuring is more about organizational design, work processes, and functions. So that you'll see that some of the subtle differences. Take a look at this photo. Do you know where it is? This is the Bondi Beach, Sydney, Australia. If you go to Bondi Beach, you'll see this swimming pool in Pacific Oceans. Think about the situation where you swim in the swimming pool or outside of the swimming pool, which will be very different. If you are in the swimming pool, and then you may drift around just like this child in a very peaceful way. You enjoy, probably you listen to music, you can talk to your friends. But if you are outside of swimming pool, and then the situation is totally different. There's a turbulent environment, big waves, and you need to prepare for that. So that unless you have really good at surfing or swimming, you're going to be in trouble. The situation we are facing with, it's not swimming pool. We are outside of the swimming pool. So that's why we need to prepare for right sizing and restructuring, maintaining core capacities, even strengthening core capacities, while we want to be very efficient. Well, that's why government should be transformed. And this is the diagram which I got from OECD report, which is focused on the how we utilize the digital technologies for e-government and digital government. So this says basically, well, how government has been evolved from analog government, very conventional, paper-based, traditional government, to e-government. Well, you may have one-stop services and very citizen focused services. So that's e-government. And then digital government, some of the people use e-government and digital government interchangeably. But digital government, the focus is more about more active role of citizens in providing public services. And then now the government has been moving toward AI government or digital platform government. So that as you see, there has been big changes and progress from analog government, e-government, digital government, and the future probably AI government, which means government should be very proactively engaged with the changing environment. We should prepare for the challenges in the future. Otherwise, we will be in trouble. Well, now I want to talk about 4S approaches. Well, what are the targets should be under right sizing and restructuring? I think 4 targets are size of government. Another S is scope of government functions. And then scale of government, strength of government capacity. So size of government is basically, as I mentioned, that's a fiscal scale and workforce size. So that some of the governments actually work on, well, reduce the size of government. For example, reduce the size of government, public employees in the central government. And they want to have more people in local governments, for example. Some government try to reform in state-owned enterprises. They want to reduce the number of people working in state-owned enterprises. Scope of function is basically what should be done by how many people you want to have in governing functions or social and security functions, education area, or how many government officials you want to have in economic prosperity, economic areas. So that sometimes there are shifts. Some of the people, well, working in the governing area, police, military, and so the governing capacity, well, rather than having a more governing capacity, public employees, some government tried to build more capacity, more functions in social welfare or economic policy areas. And also, there are some governments actually try to have more privatizations so that state government functions reduced, and then nonprofit organizations and society and market functions are growing. So that scope of government functions is basically how you redistribute public employees and government budgets by different functional areas, as well as division of labor among state, society, and market. Scale of government is basically labor division between central government, provincial government, and local governments. So that delegation to provincial government, local government, devolution of some services to provincial government and local governments, for example. That's the scale of government issues. So that probably central government is too big to handle the local service demands, and sometimes local government is too small in terms of the securing public resources for particular public service demands. And the last S is the strength of government, which is more about government capacity, ability to execute. So here, we should look at size issues, scope issues, and scale issues, and strength issues. If we reduce the size, and then we lose government capacity, strength, and then that's not really desirable. So that we should have a good balance, size, scope, and scale, and strength. Of course, different countries might have different contexts and issues, so that I don't think that there is one particular answer for that. But the bottom line is we should look at the size issues, scope of function issues, scale of government issues, and strength of government issues at the same time. Well, here I particularly want to introduce one argument made by Professor Fukuyama, and he particularly looked at scope issues and capacity strength issues. So that what the state does, scope of functions, is different from how well it can do it, the capacity issues. So that scope of functions and government capacity are different issues. For example, you want to have a narrow the scope of government, and then using market and civil society, and then at the same time to strengthen government capacity for core functions by avoiding reducing capacity and trim down the scope of government functions. Take a look at this one. So here you have scope, and probably you can work on size as well. Low versus high, narrow versus wide, and then government capacity, high and low. Of course, here the model 3 is basically very narrow scope of government. In other words, the government functions, the area is very narrow, and also the capacity is very low. That's very incompetent and impoverished government. And then the model 1 is government size and scope. Size is small and scope is very narrow, but government capacity is very high by using private sector, nonprofit sector in a balanced way. So that small but very efficient government. Model 2, it's very big government and then wide scope of government functions. And then you maintain very high level of government capacity, large but very, very effective and capable. And then model 4 is, well, government size is very big and the scope of function is very wide, but government capacity is very low level. And that's large but inefficient government. And that's what we can say, well, that's a very, very wasteful government. So that how we really try to, the model you want to have a small but efficient, you want to have large at the same time very effective and capable. And then you want to have large but inefficient. You don't want to go wasteful government, of course. So that your model should be either model 1 or model 2. Well, under NPM, new public management, the ideal scenario was small but efficient. And then some of the governments actually want to have good employment by government, so that they want to maintain large government, but at the same time, they want to be capable and effective. So that the ideal goal is different from country to country. That's the main focus of our country report. And we have 7 different country cases in our report we put together. And each country chapter has a background and national context, and then some of the initiative. What's the demand side drivers for right sizing and restructuring? And then what are the supply side initiative taken by different countries? What's the locus and focus? Who are the main actors? What are the successes we have? What are the difficulties we experienced? What are the lessons we learned from our country case? So that's the basic structure that we have. Well, this is one governance indicator from World Bank. And World Bank, they do have governance indicator, and they do have 6 different indicators. One of them is government effectiveness. And this is just the examples. And this gives you the 7 different countries we cover in the report: Fiji, Malaysia, Mongolia, Nepal, Pakistan, Philippines, Sri Lanka. And then the level of government effectiveness in 2013, 18, and 2023. So that you will see that some changes. Of course, this is not really absolute indicators, but I think this gives you a sense how different governments, countries change in terms of government effectiveness. Well, what's the change before pandemic and after pandemic? And what's the change before some of the economic difficulties experienced in particular country? And then what about now? So that this is a good indicator we can look up. Well, let me just give you some synopsis of the core things we found in our country chapters. Fiji, for example, the demand side factors is basically physical constraints and rising wage bills, so that they really concerned about the salary to be paid for government officials, increasing demand for service delivery quality and regulatory oversight. And Malaysia, large bureaucracy, and how you really reduce the redundancies and inefficiencies in service delivery and desire for sustainable economic performance. And Mongolia, for example, bureaucratic inefficiencies, service gaps, fiscal constraints, and new national goals. And Nepal, inefficient bureaucracy, and also the misallocation of resources in different levels of governments, central and local governments. And Pakistan, fiscal deficits, inefficient state-owned enterprises. So that's why they want to reform state-owned enterprises, need for government reforms. And Philippines, overlapping functions, and they do have a rationalization of government initiative for that. And Sri Lanka, large public workforce, fiscal burdens, and etc. So that you see that different countries experience different challenges and demand, which really led to right-sizing initiatives and restructuring initiative. The supply side factors are what are the initiatives taken by different countries. For example, Fiji. Well, by the way, different country reports the context are a little bit different. For example, Fiji actually focus on one particular ministry, and then the Malaysia, for example, they look at workforces in different period of time, so that it's a whole government. Mongolia, they look at some of the government process engineering initiative, so that different countries have different focus and different scope of studies. But at the same time, they look at demand side and then supply side and different challenges in different countries and intended outcomes. Supply side, for example, Fiji, as I mentioned, business process reengineering, and then ISO 9001, which is more about quality management system initiative. Malaysia, streamlining administrative processes, workforce optimization, and they really try to look at government employment size and digital transformation as well. And as I mentioned earlier, Mongolia case is more about government process reengineering and digital government. Nepal, administrative reform in general, and federalism initiatives, employment redistribution between central and local governments. And Philippines, again, rationalization initiative. And then Sri Lanka, state-owned the enterprise privatization, and then right-sizing of provincial councils and restructuring ministries, so that they do have different initiatives and they use the different tools as you heard. Well, if I summarize them, there are different tools they used, and some of the tools they used include strategic HRLAM, so workforce planning, and then redesigning the public employees, and they work on human resource development for skills development, and also the performance management is very commonly used, so that performance measurement, performance initiative, and financial management and budget reform, so that they really work on a budget size and reallocation of financial resources, and also the transparency and cost discipline without just the sharp cuts. And sometimes privatization, when particularly work on state-owned enterprise reforms, and then decentralizations and devolution of public services. For example, Nepal, the public healthcare systems was one of the issues they dealt with. And then e-government, digitalization, and using data. And then citizen engagement and communication, also work on the necessary legislations. Well, there are successes and limits of right-sizing initiative. Some of the things I already covered, Fiji achieving ISO 9001 certification, digital transformation as the some successes, but there were some limits. And reinstatement of certification lapse due to budget constraints, incomplete digitalization, so that they had good initiative for digital transformation, but often the budget constraints delay the digital transformation plans. Malaysia government transformation programs led to efficiency gains, e-government, digital technology applications, and voluntary separation schemes facilitate workforce reductions. But because of the workforce reductions, often they have some vacuum in a particular service quality, reduce the service quality. So they're maintaining quality of services and at the same time pursuing workforce reduction. That's very challenging. Mongolia, through the government re-engineering initiative, they really streamlined the processes and also the digital applications. But they had some issues with inadequate monitoring, resistance to changes, particularly when they try to have re-engineering and application of digital technologies. Nepal, local level government restructuring, effective employee redistributions. But as I mentioned earlier, redundancy in healthcare sectors and also the unequal quality of healthcare services among different local governments became an issue. Pakistan, digital transformation, performance-based reform, streamlined administrative structures were part of the successes. But sometimes the privatization of SOEs delayed or couldn't accomplish. Philippines rationalization program is really big thing, and I think it's a good plan, and also they really try to have good consultation with different government agencies, but often there is a delays in implementation because it took too much time for consultation with each agency, and sometimes the leadership change also delayed the progress. And Sri Lanka, successful privatization sometimes, but still they have bureaucratic redundancy, and also there's still some limitations in really pushing some of the initiative already mentioned earlier, so that they still need to work on administrative duplication issues. Well, take a look at this one. This is a jigsaw paradox. As you see the upper triangle and then lower triangle, the upper triangle, lower triangle, they use 4 identical pieces. They're all red triangle, green triangle, and then 2 yellow, light green pieces. They're identical size. As you know, the area of triangle, well, the length of bottom and height times half. Well, the length of bottom exactly same, upper triangle and lower triangle. The height exactly same. The area should be exactly same. But you have here big hole in the bottom triangle. Why? Well, seemingly it's a identical triangle, but the angle of red triangle and then dark green triangle, the angles are different. The slight different angle, so that the bottom triangle is not perfect triangle matched well with the upper triangle. With that small angle difference, actually you end up having big hole. So that we have limited human resources, financial resources, information technologies. What should be priority? How we really align them in a way so that we have full-scale effectiveness and maintain and strengthen our function given resources. These are the lessons we drew from 7 different country cases. First, we need to establish a strong legal and institutional framework and leadership support. That's very, very critical. Consistent, sustainable leadership support for rightsizing and rightsizing restructuring initiative. That's very, very critical. Second, enhancing stakeholder engagement and communication. Without this one, we will face with resistance from bureaucracy. We should deal with that. Third, investing in workforce planning and capacity building, so that it shouldn't be short-term workforce cut. We should have a strategic workforce planning, and then we should work on capacity building. Fourth, harnessing digital technologies for efficiency as well as quality of public services. Fifth, ensuring fiscal sustainability and cost management. And I think that's one of the key issues in right-sizing and restructuring. And sixth, encouraging decentralization and effective devolution of government functions. And that's very, very critical. Lastly, of course, not the least, establishing monitoring, evaluation, continuous improvement mechanisms. Because sometimes we have very short-term initiative, it's not really sustainable. We should build good monitoring, evaluation systems, continuous improvement. To do that, I think the first one, legal and institutional framework, is very, very necessary. Of course, leadership support is also critical. Align strategies with the missions, whether through privatization, government by network, reinvented bureaucracies, or government by market privatization to address modern challenges while maintaining public accountability. Well, this really summarized the core things to be done for reorganization, restructuring, and right sizing. Take a look at this one. This is railway. Do you know what's the width of the railway? This is 1.45. That's a standard railway. Why it's 1.45? Why not 2 or 3 for big trains? Before we invented the train, we had horse wagon. Horse wagon, they used the 4 wheels. The shaft linking 2 wheels, that's 1.45. Later, railway became 1.45. Why horse wagon 1.45? We should go back to Roman era. Roman chariot. They used 2 horses. That's the popular Roman chariot. The 2 horses hit together, that was about 1.45. And then horse wagon became 1.45. And then railway 1.45. These days we have space shuttles. They use big rocket engines. The diameter of the engines, that's about 1.45. Why? They carry by train. Of course, exaggerations. But the point I try to make is Roman chariot 1.45, horse wagon 1.45, train 1.45, rocket engine 1.5. Each country want to preserve the culture, traditions, the core values. You don't want to change them. You want to keep it and pass over to next generation. But we want to change and upgrade the capacity of government, the strength of government. Well, we need to upgrade our government by restructuring and right sizing. That's why the compelling agenda is very, very critical. Again, we should find right size, right scope of functions, right scale of government, and then good and great strength of government. And that's the last slide. And I want to give my thanks to you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Moon, for an inspiring presentation. We understand fully the report, and now I would like to ask some questions. Please allow me to ask some questions on the report. How do the rationales for public sector and private sector restructuring differ?
Well, in the private sector, of course, often they have right sizing, downsizing, restructuring, just like what we have in the public sector. But I think the critical difference would be the government, public sector. We should balance uh, among different public values, and we cannot really give up effectiveness and quality of public services for efficiency. We cannot give up the rules and regulations that we should comply in the public sector. For example, we should have, the many countries that's the case that public service positions, this job security is there, so that which is quite different from the jobs in the private sector, so that we have some limits what we can do, and then balancing different values, public values, and that's major difference if you compare to the private sector initiatives.
Thank you very much, sir. My next question is, how do strategic right-sizing frameworks ensure that workforce size, functional scope, and administrative capabilities align with the core public service mandate?
Well, I think some of the things that I mentioned, and some countries actually took some initiatives. Strategic HR planning is very critical, so that what's the and also the job analysis, so that what are the functions that we need to enhance in the future, and then we need to really strategically plan the people we need in future, and the position that we need to reduce because we cannot simply reduce the workforces overnight because we are working in the public sector, and which really related to the supply and demand of public services now and future very different, so that we should prepare our next right sizing and restructuring based on supply demand of future public services, and also redesign work processes. That's very, very critical. And what are the new technologies? For example, how AI and automation will replace routine work in the future. We need to prepare now. Uh, Otherwise, we will lose the opportunities. So that government officials should have good foresight and plan in advance so that we can be better prepared for the next generations.
Thank you very much, sir, for your answer. It's really uh, good to see how we need to prepare for the future, as also you alluded to in your presentation. My next question is, what is the role of political commitment and leadership in ensuring the success and sustainability of restructuring initiatives, especially in the face of bureaucratic inertia and political resistance?
Well, as I mentioned uh, several times, the significance of political commitment and leadership to ensure long-term uh, uh, pursuit of effective right-sizing and restructuring in governments. And because as you mentioned, the bureaucratic resistance is often inevitable, so that long-term commitment, uh, if it's not there, and then we're not going to have the results because it takes time. For example, if we need to reduce or transfer some people from one particular unit to another unit, and then uh, and sometimes you offer some packages, severance packages, so the early retirement incentives. And if you don't have financial resources for that, and then we cannot pursue that. So that, well, often I see many right sizing and restructuring programs in different countries. Beautiful plan, but not really workable action plans there because of a lack of resources and because of a lack of leadership, long-term commitment. I think the it's a long-term political commitment and leadership is important. At the same time, constant communications with civil servants is also very critical because unless we ensure the acceptance and reception of public services, and we're not going to be very successful. It's a tough
Thank you.
endeavor, of course.
Yeah, very tough indeed. Thank you. Among the APO members that joined the study, were there
Mhm.
any significant differences in the approaches to right sizing and restructuring the governments?
I think uh, because of the differences in political and administrative systems, and I think there are differences in terms of initiative taken for right sizing and restructuring. And for example, the size of state-owned enterprises and Pakistan, Sri Lanka, for example, they actually try to work on the reform in state-owned enterprises. And some of the scale issues, um, uh, the labor of divisions through decentralizations and relationship between central government and local governments. Nepal and Sri Lanka, they really try to work on that. um, business process reengineering. Fiji and Mongolia, and they really try to work on that. And I think there are some differences because of the differences in political and administrative systems. And leadership, for example, Malaysia is very interesting because of a different period of time. They do have different level of success in terms of right sizing. And so that there are different situations. Not only the political and institutional administrative system differences, but also sometimes external shocks actually force government to change. And Malaysian chapter actually addressed that issue.
Thank you, sir. Since the APO is primarily concerned with the productivity performance of the public sector, how did the right sizing and restructuring contribute to productivity in the cases studied?
Well, any reform should be uh, 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 instrumental responses to social needs and also response to the external changes and shocks. And I think uh, the right sizing and restructuring initiative taken by different governments also should be well fit and aligned with the social needs. For example, what are the functions should be expanded in a society so that social needs are different and then you should respond to that. And right sizing and restructuring initiative should be fit with that change in social need. At the same time, the external changes, if there are some financial issues with the global economy really cooling down, and we need to take that changes as part of the solutions with the right sizing and restructuring, so that any government reform, particularly right sizing and restructuring, should be aligned with uh, internal domestic social needs changes as well as external changes.
Thank you. According to the strategic approaches in right sizing and restructuring initiatives in the public sector report, encouraging the decentralization and devolution of government functions will improve the efficiency and effectiveness of public service delivery. Is this true across different services and programs of the government?
Well, I think that's very tricky question. I don't think there's a one answer for that. As I mentioned earlier, well, depending on the federalism and federal systems in a society, and these decentralization and devolution issues are adopted and handled in different ways. And sometimes, if you devolve and decentralize particular functions to local governments, and then local governments are not really ready because of a lack of resources and financial resources and capacity, and then we cannot maintain and strengthen the core functions in local level. So that I think we should really plan in a strategic way what are the functions should be handled and better handled by the local governments given resources. If they don't have good resources and capacity, and then we should have good subsidy programs or tax system changes, so that we should have a necessary legal and institutional change to strengthen the local governments. But bottom line is, well, we should have a good decentralization and devolution packages, because local governments are the entities have much closer contact with the local needs, so that they are the governments who knows better the needs of the local residents. And the question is how we make them capable in handling those local needs. And that's the something that the central government should pay attention to.
Thank you very much, Professor. I will now conclude our P Talk today with the report concludes with highlights on the different approaches undertaken by APO member governments, shaped by their unique national context. While facing some common challenges such as bureaucratic inefficiency and ineffectiveness, political resistance, and implementation complexities, one major recommendation mentioned in the report is on the continuing provision of capacity building initiative for the civil servants, public managers, and public leaders to ensure the sustainability and effectiveness of the reforms. I think it is where the APO can play a significant role in supporting the implementation of the reforms in the region. The APO extends sincere gratitude to the chief expert, Professor Moon, and the 7 national experts from Fiji, Malaysia, Nepal, Mongolia, Pakistan, the Philippines, and Sri Lanka, who have contributed to this publication work. I would like to invite Professor Moon for his final message.
Well, thank you for having me again. And I think the right sizing and restructuring uh, were very important in the past, and it will be more important in the future because we are facing with a challenging world in future. So I hope that our report and my talk is informative, and I really look forward to a further discussion in future. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. We also thank our viewers for joining us today. Please tune in to upcoming APOP talks to learn about different topics that affect the productivity of individuals, organizations, and economies. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.